Hi, JJ here with the Art of Value. Welcome. Well, today we're going to look at the portfolios of 7 so-called guru or super investors for the first quarter of 2023. What they've been buying, what they've been selling, or doing nothing. So let's get straight into it. Let's see what they've been doing. Why not start with one of the greatest investors of all time, Warren Buffett. In fact, 2 of the greatest because Charlie Munger's in here too. It's Berkshire Hathaway. The 2 of them invest together, and there are other investors in there also. But mainly, they've been making these decisions over decades, so let's see what they've been buying and selling this past quarter. So these are Berkshire Hathaway's top positions, of course. We can see Apple up there in number 1 by a long way. On Ticker Terminal, it actually says it's 50% of the portfolio, more than 50%. I don't know if that's actually correct. I think it's a bit lower than that. And Bank of America is 9.89, way down there. In the last video, I talked about circling the wagons from Mohnish Pabrai, and he talks about protecting your best investments by not selling them. And this is a very good example of that. We see Apple up here with 50%. They have not sold it. They've just accumulated it and let it run and run it up to multi-bagger status. Bank of America's nearly 10% of the portfolio. American Express, 8.37. Coca-Cola down to 8, and Chevron and Occidental, 2 oil companies. They make up more than 11% together. And then Kraft Heinz makes that top list. None of the other positions are really above 5%. So pretty concentrated, even though Berkshire owns a lot of stocks, and we'll see that in a minute. They're very concentrated with Apple. Now, if we go down the list, we can see a lot more stocks that Berkshire owns. So Moody's Corp is 2.5% of the portfolio only, but that does represent $7.5 billion still. Activision Blizzard, which they've sold 6.22% of in the quarter. Don't know if that's going to be a long-term position. It may just be arbitrage. They talked about that being just like the old days when they were smaller, had a lot less money. And HP, they added 15.77. That's hasn't been much talked about, but they've added to that again. So that makes up $3.5 billion. And we go down the list there, we see selling some of General Motors, 20% of General Motors. Not really surprised. It's a long-term holding again, but maybe losing a bit of conviction in General Motors there, and not much else going on there. But it's interesting to see these are all the positions of Berkshire Hathaway above $1 billion. So to some other funds, $1 billion would be a huge amount, but it really just makes up less than 1% of Berkshire's portfolio. Kroger's in there, Visa's $1.8 billion, and MasterCard, both of those credit card companies. Charter Communications still got that. So they've still got these, and right down the bottom, just over $1 billion worth is Amazon. Not forgetting that they bought that. They seem to have sold 1% of that. So we might as well take a look at these positions under $1 billion, from $1 billion to $500 million. Still, in other portfolio funds, those would be big positions, but not for Berkshire Hathaway. And what stands out there, that Snowflake position that they bought before the IPO, just under $1 billion worth now. T-Mobile's in there. Ally Financial, which was a new buy. They seem to trim that just by 2%. Markel Group, that's an interesting buy that they have bought recently. Have been adding to a little bit in this quarter because I own Markel. It's going to be a long-term position for me. Well, that's how I plan it at the moment. And we'll be looking at the investor who invests for Markel there, Thomas Gayner, in this group of investors as well. So they're known as a baby Berkshire sometimes, a lot smaller value, but obviously they've got the backing of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger there. And rounding out the list, right at the bottom there is New Holdings, which is still in there at $500 million. These $500 million, as I said, that would be a big position to some other funds, but not for Berkshire. They can drop $500 million, and that's just a starter position for them. So this rounds out the list, going right down to $41 million there. And speaking of starter positions, Diageo right at the bottom there, $41 million. I don't know why they'd only spend $41 million on a stock. It seems so low. I wonder who that was in the company. And so we see StoneCo there, Insurance Australia Group. Interesting to see these little positions in Berkshire that they have accumulated. We go over to data room, we can see the activity, consolidated activity here of buys in the quarter. So HB, Occidental Petroleum, Apple, Bank of America, Markel, Citigroup, Paramount Global, Capital One Financial, Diageo, and Vitesse Energy. Those last 3 are new buys for Berkshire. And the sales during the quarter, interesting to see these consolidated sales, mostly trimming, but some 100%. Notably, we have General Motors trimming 20%, and the banks during this tumultuous bank quarter, they got rid of Bank of New York Mellon, 100% sale. RH Limited, furniture, high-end furniture, sold 100%. Taiwan Semiconductor. Buffett said that he changed his mind about that. That was a big position, and he changed his mind because of the location. Says it's a great company, but that is not comfortable with Taiwan. You'd have to say if there was conflict between the US and Taiwan, there'll be a lot of other companies affected, including Apple, you'd say. The RH position's not that old. I remember them buying that 2 or 3 years ago, perhaps, and it was like $500 million. And I remember looking at the company and wondering why they bought it. And they've sold. Next up, we have Mohnish Pabrai. I've made a couple of videos. The last 2 videos I made were about Mohnish Pabrai and what he's been saying lately. And you'll notice his top holding in the list, Racist from Turkey. He's been talking a lot about that as a multi-bagger. He's really keen on races. He hasn't touched it, but he's taken away from Micron Technology, 14.44%, which he has been pretty bullish on over the last few years. I just wonder if he's changed his mind a little bit, has less conviction from what's happened. Its product's been banned from China, but I think this was before that. That news is pretty recent. So I just wonder what he thinks about Micron. He has said that Micron is becoming less cyclical. If you look at the latest revenue, it has dropped. So maybe he's changed his mind about it being cyclical. And I noticed that Li Lu, who we'll look at too in this group of investors, has also sold some, and they worked on the thesis together. So that interests me. I own Micron myself, not investment advice at all, any of this. But I'm interested just to hear what they've got to say about Micron in the coming months. I haven't sold any, not planning to. And if you look at Micron over the long term, it's sort of been a long-term compounder already. But I just wonder if he's changed his thesis there. It'll be interesting to find out. What else have we got here? Edelweiss Financial, he added to a little bit, 3.4%. Suntech Realty, nothing there. He bought Brookfield Corp. Ticker BN, he added 8.46%. That's an interesting new buy there for Mohnish. And Nice Holdings, which is a Korean company, he has sold 28% of that. So I just wonder, he hasn't really said anything about that before. So Rain Industries, nothing there. And Seritage, he's only just got a small holding of Seritage there. I don't know why he's holding on to those shares. He did say in a recent talk it's okay to let Seritage go when he was talking about circling the wagons around your best investments. Kind of admits that that didn't work out, and he's happy to let it go. So I don't know why he's just got a little shareholding there still. He didn't say. And over at Data Roma now, looking at his holdings, we just see the US holdings. Over at Ticker, where we're just looking at, it shows more of his international holdings. I think there might be some that aren't there, or there's one at least that I know of, which is Naspers, which holds Tencent, more than 90%. And he explains that in Circling the Wagons talk, which the last episode I made was about that. Went in depth into that talk, really a good talk. So I'll put a link in the description to that, and perhaps at the end of this video too. So apart from Brookfield there, he's really focused on Turkey. He talks so much about the Turkish situation, investing in Turkey, how it's so great. It's not for novices, is it? It's not for beginners or even intermediate. It's an advanced situation. He talks about buying in Turkey, which has got a high inflation, but he talks about buying companies that earn money in euros or US dollars from outside the country, but I wouldn't be investing there myself, not in my circle of competence. He's able to go there, talk to investors, he's got friends there, investors there. He's looking for 100 baggers really over the long term. He's also keen on India as well. He goes to India, he's got a number of companies in India as well, as we can see in the ticker terminal list there. He's able to go there, he knows people there, so he's sort of sifting through these companies in India, but I know a lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable with that, especially if they can't go there or can't invest there. It's not easy to invest there, so he's really getting into buying these small caps from Turkey and India with his wisdom and knowledge that these will be multi-baggers in the future, high multi-baggers, he's hoping. If you're getting value out of this episode so far, I appreciate it if you hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube. And also, we've just passed 1,000 subscribers and followers across YouTube and Spotify, the 2 main video platforms. So if you're not subscribed yet, maybe think about that if you're enjoying the episode. Next up, we have the great investor Li Lu, who invests in China and America. A lot of people know the story of how he was really a refugee from China after the Tiananmen Square in the 80s when he was a student activist there, and he ended up going to Columbia Business School, the spiritual home of value investing, and turned into a great investor over time. Knows Charlie Munger, invests for Charlie Munger, so he's got a lot of trust from some of the best of all time investors. And what we see here is that he added to Bank of America Corp during that quarter, 24% in Bank of America, and Micron. He sold 40% of his big Micron technology stake. And that's interesting because he and Pabrai, as I said, worked on the thesis together for this, and they've both sold some during the quarter. So I wonder what they've been talking about. Would like to be a fly on the wall to hear what they've been talking about there in terms of the Micron situation. But his top holding here is Postal Savings Bank of China, which I know nothing about. I don't think many American investors know much about it at all, but he's taken a big position. Of course, he knows a lot about China and America. So the two biggest economies in the world he knows a great deal about, so he can invest more easily in both of those countries. So down the list is Alphabet. Interesting to see he owns a few of these large US mega caps: Micron Technology, Alphabet, Berkshire Hathaway, Alphabet again, so double share there of Alphabet, both classes of shares, and East West Bancorp is a new holding. So during this tumultuous quarter for banking, he went in and presumably thought that was cheap and good, and Apple rounding up his shares there. I think he probably also owns BYD, the Chinese car and battery company, which is doing very well selling EVs in China, doing very well against Tesla, one of the few companies that is. I don't know where that shareholding is. I think he bought it a long time ago, and so maybe it doesn't show up here, but he has talked about it, and Berkshire Hathaway also owns it. It wasn't on their list, but they've been selling it down, I think. I don't know how many shares they've got left, but they've been selling it down over the past few quarters. They've had it for over a decade, well over a decade. Maybe they think it's getting expensive. Maybe they think the prospects aren't as good for BYD. I just don't know the reasons. If we go over to Dataroma here, we can see his activity in the US stocks just over the last few quarters. We see that they're the added to Bank of America Corp, 24%. And so we see that East West Bancorp buy and Micron sell. And before that, we can see that he added to Google in Q4 2022 and Q2 2022. He is adding to Google all this time. First time buying GOOGL, the Alphabet, that's class of stock, and sold out of Meta. Completely lost conviction of Meta during that time when Mark Zuckerberg was investing heavily into the metaverse. I guess he didn't like that. He didn't like the prospects. And then just before that, we go back way down to Q3 2021 when he bought some Berkshire Hathaway. Next, we have Chuck Akre from Akre Capital Management. And again, Mohnish Pabrai has been talking about him lately. He had dinner with him. He said in one of his talks, he had dinner with him at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting. I wonder how much he has to do with the portfolio. I would say still quite a lot. Mohnish talked about how he lives in a one traffic light town, and he went there to visit him and talked about his investments. And so Mohnish respects Chuck Akre hugely, and Chuck has had some huge multi-baggers over the years. His portfolio is incredibly interesting to me. We can see at the top of the list MasterCard. He's just been buying these and keeping them and adding to them over time. Mohnish talked about how he wasn't afraid to add to them even over the decades, even at higher prices, which is hard to do. We kind of have this anchoring. If we bought lower, it's hard to buy higher. We see in the list there MasterCard, Moody's, and this is an order, and American Tower Corp, which I think has been a 100-bagger for Chuck. He's had several hundred baggers. Constellation Software, of course. And way down the list, we can see Topicus, which is a spin-off from Constellation Software, which they've been adding to this quarter, which is really interesting to me. It's a stock that I own because I'm after smaller caps that have a long runway for growth, which is kind of the Chuck Akre way of investing. Long runway for growth, great management, and a great quality company. This is a three-legged stool of Chuck Akre's, which Mohnish has talked about. After Constellation Software, we have Visa, O'Reilly Automotive, KKR & Co., Roper Technologies, Brookfield. So he's been adding to Brookfield, or they've been adding to Brookfield, 4.72%, along with Mohnish. That's interesting that they've both added to that in the same quarter. CoStar Group, this is a list of quality companies. Adobe, which he's sold a little bit out of, but not very much. Danaher, Topicus, which represents $346 million of value for them, which is getting quite big. They seem to be adding to it, which is encouraging to me, and it's interesting to see that they haven't sold out of Topicus. Got CarMax, Brookfield Asset Management. Another one further down the list is Digital Bridge Group. So I've been looking at this a bit lately, starting to look into this. It's similar to American Tower in a way, if we think about digital infrastructure, but they own a greater diversity. The CEO of Digital Bridge owned a company and sold it to American Tower not long ago. And so it's interesting to see that they have been adding to Digital Bridge. I noticed over the last 3 quarters, we'll see in a minute, that they've been adding to this. So it's really interesting to me that Chuck Akre's company is interested in this company. I want to know why, and it's a small cap. They look for small caps with a long runway for growth. So I'm very interested in taking a look at this company and digging deep and seeing why they might be so interested in it. At the bottom there, we see Dollar Tree, which they sold a bit of. If we jump over to Dataroma here, we can just see a consolidated activity. You can see that they're buying of Brookfield Corp for 4.7%, just like Mohnish Pabrai. The Digital Bridge Group is the next, 2.86% they added to. They added to KKR & Co. just a little bit more. American Tower, it's been a huge compounder, long runner for them. And even added to MasterCard just a little bit. So they sold out of Alarm.com. I saw that in previous quarters, so it's interesting that they've sold out of that completely. CarMax, Adobe, Dollar Tree, and O'Reilly Automotive, they all sold just a little bit of. Well, CarMax, they sold 41.44% of, which is quite a lot to sell. So just adding to those positions and taking away from some. Next up, we have Bill Ackman, who's quite a controversial figure at times. He's certainly got a lot to say about everything on Twitter all the time. Definitely get the feeling he's talking his own book, sometimes talking up stocks or down. It's only 7 positions. He's known as a very focused investor, taking big positions in just a few companies at a time. And so this quarter, what's notable is that he bought Google, added to Google there in a big position. Why now is interesting. That the stock did run down and he bought it. I made a video about their new AI developments. I'll put that link in the description too. He bought that before that. So I wonder if he thinks that Google's been way run down and it's still got a good future ahead. There's been a lot of talk about OpenAI and ChatGPT taking away Google's moat, Google's search moat. He obviously disagrees buying it and for the long term. But sometimes he changed his mind. You might remember that he sold out of Netflix completely, took a big position in Netflix and then sold out just soon after. So he can change his mind. But we see in this quarter, Howard Hughes Corp added to that. Canadian Pacific Kansas City added to it just a fraction and bought Google, reducing lows a little bit, and Chipotle Mexican Grill and Hilton Worldwide Holdings reducing to 7% there. But not a lot of action except for that Google buy. A lot of these top investors seem to own Google or have been buying Google. Next up is David Tepper from Appaloosa Management. He's done very well over the last few decades in a sustained way. So a very good investor. Seems to have a different kind of style to some other value investors or more focused investors. He seems to own a lot of stocks, but they are concentrated more towards the top. If we look here, Alphabet is the top position at $219 million. He added to Alphabet 5.76 during the quarter, just like Bill Ackman did. And Amazon is his next position. He added 33%, so buying up Amazon in this quarter. And Uber, adding to Uber. Notice there's a lot of technology companies there. He's not afraid of tech, quite into tech. Constellation Energy Corp, though, he sold nearly 13% of Meta. He added 22% to Meta, buying up these big technology companies during the quarter. He bought FedEx during the quarter, known as an economy bet of the whole economy. People look at earnings. If FedEx is not doing well, then there could be economic trouble. Microsoft Corp, he added a little bit to that. So these big techs he's been adding to. Next up, though, we see something very interesting. He bought Tesla. New buy in Tesla of $31 million in Tesla. And also, very notably, Arc Innovation bought $20 million of Arc, which is quite surprising, but obviously thinks it's cheap enough. It's got cheap enough for long enough, and now's the time to get in, which is, I find that fascinating. And buying Match Group as well, another interesting buy for the quarter. So he's really been buying tech during this time when kind of bear market for tech. It's been going on for quite a long time now, really since the beginning of February 2021. I think it has been a little bit like after the dot-com bubble, the tech bubble in the early 2000s, that period. It's starting to feel like that, where some of these companies lost 50, 60, 70, 80%. You look at Arc Innovation. I'm certainly not buying Arc, but I agree with David Tepper there. I have bought Tesla. You can go back in my videos and see when I bought there. It was around the $125 mark where I thought got cheap enough, and I think it's a good company. Controversial CEO, but no doubting that he's one of the entrepreneurs of our time, one of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time. So here we see that consolidated list of buys and sells from David Tepper over the quarter, or Appaloosa management. So Uber's up the top, and Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet. Interesting that it's all a big megatechs, the US megatechs, isn't it? Macy's, he added a little bit to it. I didn't say that before. So buying for the first time FedEx, well, I don't know if it's the first time, but buying new positions in FedEx, Nvidia, Tesla, Arc Innovation, and Match Group there. So some really interesting buys from David Tepper there in that quarter. It'd be interesting to see how they work out. Did he time it right in terms of buying at the bottom? Maybe he doesn't mind, but I think it has been a good time to buy tech last year as well, as some of them dropped, some so low. So last but not least is Tom Gayner from Markel. I mentioned him earlier, how he invests in quite a different way. If you want to know his philosophy, the book Richer, Wiser, Happier, which I'll put a link to, a referral link in the description. Really good book. There's a chapter on him about how he invests incrementally every quarter. He thinks of it like a sports team, and there's a bench, and he adds to it, and he puts the players in play, the companies in play, and adds to them, makes the A team, and then there's the B team, C team. So he'll knock them down the list or knock them up quarter by quarter. He doesn't go in big and just buy one position, say like a Bill Ackman does. He'll do it incrementally over time. That's his way of investing, but it's working out pretty well so far. So he ends up owning a lot of stocks, but some of them are very small positions, more like tracking positions, and then they kind of work their way up the scoreboard, if you like. So at the top is Berkshire Hathaway. And so Berkshire Hathaway, as I said, owns some Markel shares, and Markel owns some Berkshire Hathaway. Markel is known as a baby Berkshire. In a similar way, they have an insurance company. They have investment, which Tom Gayner operates, and they also make acquisitions like Berkshire. That's sort of becoming more and more so over time. So they're getting to that phase. Still a mid cap, not a small cap, but not a massive cap either. And so it'll be interesting to see how Tom Gayner's investments work out over time. We can see from the list here, Berkshire Hathaway is number one, making up about 12% of the portfolio. Deere & Co. is about 4%. Alphabet is 3.6%. Then Brookfield Corp again, that's come up a lot, hasn't it? BN, Home Depot, Diageo, Analog Devices, Visa, Amazon, Walt Disney, Apple, Novo Nordisk, Watts Co. You can see down the list there, but that's getting pretty small, getting down to under 2%. So he is fairly focused on the top positions. Berkshire's 12%, and then it jumps down to 4% and then goes down pretty quickly from there. So a big owner of Berkshire still at this point. And if we jump over to Dataroma, we can see the buys for the quarter. So he's added to LPL Financial Holdings was the most percentage-wise, and Capital One Financial, Target, Intercontinental, Renaissance Holdings, CarMax, Eastman Chemical, Dollar General, Alphabet, again Alphabet, and the list goes on. So he's added to quite a few companies during the quarter incrementally. And what's he sold? We can see what he's sold there. Hasn't sold very much, sold out of a few stocks. Netflix was one of them, but he's bumped it down the list to zero, kicked it off the team, if you like. So that's the most notable there. Bought quite a few during the quarter and not sold very many, but sold completely out of Netflix. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to put a couple of episodes up here. I'll put links in the description as well for those watching or listening somewhere else. One about Warren Buffett and one about Mohnish Pabrai, what they've been saying and doing recently. So if you enjoy this episode, you will no doubt enjoy one of those. And in the meantime, thanks for watching or listening, and I'll see you next time.